It's nice to be with you after I've been post 6 months. Wendy's challenge to me today was to just reflect back to you what it's been like in the first 6 months, where we are now and where I see us going. So I'll try and do that very succinctly. The last 6 months have been absolutely fascinating for me, and I have to say my feet have not touched the ground. And in some respects that's fantastic. I'll come back to the less fantastic bit in a minute. My first experience after I'd been offered the post, when I actually came to Bristol, was to meet with a group of very senior managers across the council at a big conference we were having. And Helen will recall this. There was a point where we asked people if they wanted to stand up and say things, and very few people were prepared to. And I asked the question of why weren't they prepared to stand up and say something? And people said, because there's a blame culture. And I felt really sad and concerned about that, because certainly the last thing I want to do is be the chief executive of an organisation where we've got blame culture. Learning culture, yes. Blame, no. So I've arrived and I found myself with quite a number of challenges. There were geographical challenges. Finding where in Bristol isn't always easy. The first time I went to the Create Centre, it took me at least 3 attempts to get there. I could see where I wanted to go, I couldn't figure out how to drive there. So there's been geographic challenges. There have been challenges in terms of understanding the different tiers of what's going on here. So I've had to learn a lot around the West of England and the partnerships and the agendas there. The LSP, and we can come back to that one, because the week before I arrived there was a report which said it wasn't fit for purpose to deliver the future agenda that CAA was bringing down the tracks. So there was, the partnership agenda, which I had to start to understand here, getting to know the local partners. So I've actually spent an awful lot of time out of the council house, usually early mornings, on an evening, on a weekend, trying to see partners. Understanding the council's agenda internally and starting to begin to transform how we as a council do business. When I arrived as a council, not only was there this sort of blame culture, but it was very siloed. And I think the kind of agendas that we're all facing means that we can't afford to work in that kind of way anymore. One of the biggest complaints I had from people outside was, I wish your officers had just talked to each other. And, I see a number of nods around the room. I think I recognised early on that was something we needed to change. Not their fault, but the directors who were a team when I arrived were not only in separate offices, they're in separate buildings. So what's the chance of them bumping into each other and having a conversation in the corridor? So there's an awful lot of things we're trying to change at once. And I think this is part of the challenge, is trying to put building blocks in place quickly so we can start to deliver to people on the ground. Just in terms of some of those building blocks, you're aware that we have a new embryonic LSP, which is focused in terms of having both the executive and a number of boards focused on delivery. It isn't finished yet, it's work in progress, and there are still conversations to be had about that. I've taken forward a new management team structure. Most of that's in place, and as Helen said, one of the posts we're interviewing for today is part of that structure. We'll also be looking at our second and third tiers. I think the issue about this in terms of the structure, which is different from before, is everybody has an external facing responsibility and accountability, as well as inward focus on the organisation. Because actually, I think part of the problem is we haven't been outward looking enough, and that's something that we're trying to change very quickly. As part of that, the new management team are coming together and going to physically relocate. Because I'm a great believer that if we're going to ask other people to do things differently, we've got to start with ourselves. And I think that is, part of what we need to start making a difference. But I think the real challenge is around how we start to drive up performance. Helen said on a number of occasions, Bristol is 2-star, improving well. That puts us in the bottom quartile. It's not very good. And the challenge under the new comprehensive performance assessment is even more challenging because we will be judged, as with our partners, on how we work together to deliver on the ground. So it is very much around how can we create a real momentum that is cultural rather than structural. I remember somebody saying in a meeting to me, you know, culture eats structure for breakfast. And I think they're absolutely right, that if you can put as many structures as you want in place, if you don't change how the organisation does business, then actually, you know, you're not going to achieve it. So we've got to change how we relate to people. And that is going to be quite a significant challenge. So just in terms of what that means for us as an organisation and then what it means in terms of how we relate to you, internally, we've got a massive transformation project, reducing the number of buildings we work from, because they're expensive to run. You know, all the maintenance costs, the energy costs, it's not very green to actually have 52 buildings when you could probably have about 17. So actually reducing the number of buildings, it means people working differently, more flexible working. Some people will really welcome the opportunity to work from home more, or to work more from a mobile kind of view, and pop into the nearest office and log on, rather than going to a city centre office. It also supports the green agenda for the city, if people are doing less journeys and less travelling. So there are some benefits in terms of some of those organisational changes, but we don't get there easily, because we're a heavily unionised council, and some of the kinds of things we're suggesting is people changing their working practices, and that's not always easy to ask people to do. But I think we recognise that if we look back, all of us, at the kind of technologies we've used throughout our careers, you know, I was talking at a conference at the weekend and actually saying, you know, I can remember when the council sort of did business in smoke-filled rooms. I've no doubt Helen can remember that as well. Fortunately, we don't now, so you know, it's improved in terms of the health agenda. People used to have typewriters, and you know, you'd have to sort of share a phone on the desk. Now people are just out with their mobiles. So the technology will bring lots of benefits, but the change and the adaptation is quite a challenge. We've also got at the moment things like the credit crunch. That's giving the council some real challenges, because income drops off rapidly when we have circumstances like these. People don't move house as often. We don't have as many planning applications. The kind of things where the council has income streams are very quickly impacted on. So that gives us some real challenges very early that we need to think about how we manage. But in some respects, that makes it even more important that we build the right relationships with people citywide. Helen talked about commissioning. We're trying to gear ourselves up into an organisation that commissions from people across the city. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We're obviously moving very quickly, because of the national agenda, towards things like personalisation in adult social care. And that will mean things like individual budgets. Now, the reality is, you know, the articulate middle classes will have probably no difficulty accessing some of those services as they transform. There will be sections of our community who are going to need a lot more support as we move forward, because one, it will be new, and two, it will require things to be done in a different way, and it will mean that we need advocacy out there in communities to help people to do that. So as we begin to look at how we deliver services differently, we genuinely need to engage with you, because we need you to be out there to deliver those services. So I think there's some work that we need to be doing over the next 12 months, because we're not going to get there instantly, it isn't instant cooking, to say how can we reconfigure our services, and how can you reconfigure to actually respond to that and be able to be part of the delivery mechanism out there in the community. And I have to say, I was very heartened by somebody I was speaking to over lunch about social enterprises. Hello. And we were actually talking over lunch about, you know, how we can actually look to have consortia and social enterprises that can take a much stronger role across the city. And I was really pleased to hear that you were involved in similar conversations from your side as well. So I think, you know, in the 6 months, yes, it feels we've come a long way. What I feel is there's a massive journey ahead of us. But what I'm really looking forward to is working with yourselves, with our elected members, in terms of how we can shape that for Bristol for the future. Thank you.